was looking for an appropriate quote to start, because those who are talking about quote who've read my judgment in my heads know that I like quotes. And with everything else that's been happening in the world, I didn't actually realize how apt this quote was, and I'd like to share it with you. It's more a poem than anything else. And I think it's very apt for tonight's discussion as well. First, they came for the communists, and I did not speak out because I was not a communist. Then they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak out for me. We want to start the discussion as far as the intersection of identity and our legal culture is concerned. And I'm very privileged and excited to hand the floor to my colleague, junior member of the Bridge Group of Advocates, Khumalo, who will be facilitating our panel discussion tonight on this very, very interesting topic. So, Khumalo, over to you.
Thank you, Siska, and thank you everyone for coming through. Tonight's discussion really is dedicated to providing a space for reflection and to participate and to keep an open mind when it comes to socially conscious issues like LGBTQI plus matters. And you know, I must say at the outset that when talking about queer matters, I could speak from Cape to Cairo and back. So Siska will be assisting me with keeping track of the time.
Yes, certainly. And then for our attendees online, if there's any questions that you wish to pose towards the last half an hour of the talk, please feel free to include it in the chat box or to raise your virtual hand, and we'll open up those discussions as well.
Thanks, Siska. So I'll start with introducing each of our panelists for tonight. And I'm going to start with Mokgopa. Neo holds a LLB degree from the University of Cape Town. I must mention that Neo's pronouns are they, them. They are an artist, writer, living and working in Johannesburg. They're a writing and research manager at the Nelson Mandela Foundation, a thought fellow with Stellenbosch University, Center for Children for Critical and Creative Thought. My apologies. It was brilliant work. No. And they write a regular column with the Daily Maverick titled Ande. Am I saying it right? What's best about Neo is that Neo is my friend as well. And then next to Neo, we have Paulette Khumalo. Paulette's pronouns are she, her. She is an associate at Norton Fulbright, specializing in dispute resolution, insurance-related litigation, policy interpretation, and medical law. And most significantly, as Paulette is a chairperson of Norton Fulbright Pride Committee and regularly contributes to the firm's inclusivity panel discussions and publications. Then we have someone who probably does not need much of an introduction, and
I'll take one.
And is becoming a regular here at Bridge Group is Sia Khumalo. And no, Paulette and Sia are not related. Sia is an author of several social political analysis and the daring book, You Have to Be Gay to Know God. And we do have copies of the book with us if you want to sign a copy. Which made the long list for the Alan Paton Literary Awards from the Sunday Times and various other prestigious awards. Thank you. For coming tonight. Okay, so we'll just start with the topic. The topic for tonight is intersection of identity and legal culture. I'm going to start with you now. What do we mean by identity and intersectionality? Why does identity matter?
I think this is a tricky question. I often struggle with it myself as well. The thing that identity is keeps shifting and changing. I think at its most basic level, perhaps there's two ways of understanding identity. or accessing it. On the one hand, identity is how you identified in society. And the ways in which you identify in society has many different measures, different lenses, different, I'm going to say methodologies, if I'm going to be fancy,
Yes.
to identify people. And maybe a nice example of what I mean by this is, so this academic, her name is Oyeronke Oyewumi, wrote a book called The Invention of Women. And in it, she was discussing and exploring Yoruba land at the time and different colonial processes of transforming Yoruba land to Nigeria, and how when settlers came to Yoruba land, Yoruban people didn't have a notion for gender. Society wasn't structured in those ways. In fact, it was more structured by age. And sometimes as well by timbre of voice was how you were hierarchied in that society, how you were given power, status, class, those kinds of things. And of course, that has its own problems as well, like any other system. But then when the call or the need to begin identifying started happening to people in Yoruba land, their bodies were being looked at. And so this whole new way of identifying people kind of emerged in Yoruba land. It was using the body. The way that she writes about it is that, the body was being excavated or mined for identity. So you look at a person and you know what I mean, like these pieces add up to this kind of identity. So there's a kind of outside approach then, how the society sees you, and there's different ways, different kinds of societies in different time periods, we view identity differently. But there's also kind of an inward identity, kind of how you understand yourself, how you sleep at night, how you wake up in the morning, the vision you have of yourself in your dreams, what I mean, that settled inward knowing, that inward knowledge of who you are and what you are. Is the other kind of mode of identity as well. And so identity is how and who you are and how you're understood in society and how you understand yourself. Intersectionality looks at a series sometimes of identity markers and tries to understand that, or tries to kind of advocate for an understanding that no one is ever one thing, that it's not possible for me to just be Black, for instance. I'm also a Black queer person in a particular class who lives in a particular place, who works in a particular space. And the reason why that's important is that I think, who was it? Kimberly Crenshaw, who kind of coined the term intersectionality. The case study that I think that she was using, similar to the case study that she was using, was around legislation intended to promote equity or equality with women, so advancing women's interests in society. And then there was other legislation, after, what's the word, segregation, I think it was, in America, and then the other legislation focuses on Black people, so Black economic empowerment as we would know it, affirmative action and otherwise. And what kept happening is that Black women kept falling through the cracks. So with the women's legislation, white women were being prioritized, and with Black people, Black men were being prioritized. And so there's this sexism and racism happening at the same time. And so intersectionality tries to say that, well, we need to have legislation that understands that it's only just women. We wanted to target women of a particular race, a particular class, you know what I mean? And it's that kind of consciousness that says that things happen not because of one clear identity, but multiple identities. And so you have layers, not only of oppression, which I think has been spoken about a lot, especially, you know what I mean, that you are oppressed in these ways and this way, but also with privilege as well, so I am privileged in multiple ways as well. I'm often assumed to be a man, I have this deep voice, I'm tall, so there's this crazy statistic that says that tall people are paid more, are trusted, and are given leadership positions. It's absurd. I promise. And they were controlling for gender and So intersectionality says that, yes. So intersectionality says to me then, so yes, I can identify with particular kinds of oppression that I do experience because I'm a Black person. But I'm also a privileged Black person. I'm kind of middle class, and all the rest of it. And so it's trying to say you are never one thing, that there are multiple ways of understanding a person. You can understand it as a layering, perhaps, of identities, or you can understand it perhaps as the term tries to kind of denote intersectionality, almost on a Cartesian plane almost, where there are these points and you find yourself at this intersection of gender, race, class, and that kind of pinpoints in that kind of way. And it matters because we can't change the world without understanding these principles. We can't change the world without understanding how people suffer, how people are prejudiced, how people are oppressed. And if we're wanting to create a more just world, we need to be considerate of intersectionality and identity.
And just as a last point today, while we're still there now, is this space, I mean, this is real lawyers and we're in the legal profession, is it immune from that? I often speak about, spaces being racialized, sexualized, and so perhaps making it more relative for us. And why is it particularly important for the legal space and legal culture?
I have so many thoughts going through my mind.
We can ask, anyone can have a jab.
Sure. I guess maybe let me start by saying, so when I was taught law, and maybe your experience is different, but I was taught or given the law as though it was this pristine science, that it has no values, it's neutral, it's morally neutral, it is absent of any culture or ideology. And that the execution of the law is a pure matter. It's about reading the text, it's about reading, you know what I mean, and understanding if the text is unclear, then trying to divine the intention of the judiciary. But that leaves a very dangerous kinds of space. So, and again, I'm sure you know more about this than I do, but I'll never forget the Wookie case, if I'm saying it right. So if I'm remembering correctly as well, my law degree was years ago. But here was a woman who wanted to be a lawyer, and she had studied the law, and she had a law degree, and then she approaches the bar, I think it was, and says, listen, I've got my law degree, I would like to be a lawyer, thank you very much. And she was rejected, and they said, no, women can't be lawyers. Why, So they look at the legislation and it says that a person with a law degree, in other words, who studied law in other words. And the word person at the time was understood that in that particular context, that they could never have meant women to be lawyers. How could they, in that particular case? And what I'm trying to point to really, and the case goes on, but what I'm trying to point to is that there is values, there is ideologies, there are presumptions and kind of perspectives and other perspectives and otherwise within the law, but also in legal culture as well. And I think that the way that I want to enter it is through society. That society is a sexualized, racialized environment and a very gendered environment as well. I think about, for instance, the invention of women's bathrooms. It wasn't always the case that women had public bathrooms, and this was because the public domain was understood to be a masculine men's environment, and that the private or the home environment was understood. So it was never intended. What's the word now? I must be careful with my words.
It's the right place.
But the architects of particular societies and histories in history had never imagined that women would be free to walk around and have a life and have a job and sign their own contracts and otherwise with no coverture and other things. And so they never built bathrooms, And so then society as a whole was understood as a masculine endeavor, Only kind of years later, through advocacy of women's rights groups and suffragette groups and otherwise, were women's bathrooms instituted. And again, and similarly with society, the legal fraternity is exactly the same. It's not immune to those ideologies. And I feel it myself, even where I work, right? There's an ideal vision of what the right one looks like, So, and again, I'm hoping we're kind of going to be saying very sensitive things and it's going to be a little bit uncomfortable. But when I think of a lawyer, I think of a white man, a tall white man. And so when we have that model in your head, suddenly you begin, okay, well, how can I approximate that? How can I speak properly then, similar to that? How can I walk like that as well? How can I dress like that as well? So yes, I can't be it, but I can come close as possible to it as well. You know what I mean? And in those ways, it's you're responding to how sexualized, how gendered the space is. And to be conscious of that means then, what's the word? Give me 2 seconds. The demands of that realization commit you to having to change that. Once you are aware of that, then you're committed to fighting for that kind of justice, I think.
Thank you so much. Now, and I suppose with having the space being so gendered and sexualized and racialized, one of the effects of that is that we create biases. And so the narrative always comes from that space, that privileged space. And so it's quite important to have other voices coming to those spaces. And I think that also highlights why it's important to have the queer visibility and queer voices. And this is bringing me to now Paulette. Paulette, please share with us, the work that you do at Pride Committee at your law firm.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thanks for hearing me. So the purpose of the Pride Committee, and I think it existed for a while. I think a lot of entities, corporates, they have a big, we do diversity and inclusion. And, they don't really have any specific detail of what kind of diversity and inclusion are you talking about? How much of your management is actually diverse? And if they are diverse, in what ways? How do you know they're diverse other than the color of their skin? Are you hiring lower or juniors to fill your bids with enough BEE points? Are you actually building people up? So my fight has always been that equality, if we come from a non-equal space, is not equal, right? Until we are all at the same level. I think that when we go to work, we don't get to leave our identities at home. And that relates to whether we are queer, whether we are Black, whether we are women, whether we are men, whether we are white. It comes with every single kind of learning and teaching that we've been taught in our experiences in our lives. We've gone to church. Some of us come from homes where certain beliefs are not questioned. There are ways in which I was taught as a woman, a Zulu woman, not to speak to an older person, umuntu omdala, by first name. And now I have to walk in these spaces and look at an older person in the eye and speak to them as if they're my equal. And that is a cultural problem where if I struggle with that, I'm assumed to be just not sure of myself, or I am not brave, I just don't have that thing. Whereas I just have to do a whole lot of unlearning to assimilate to a culture that, like you said, was made for the white man. The building I work in now was made for the white man. And that is who, when I look up in the ranks, I see. So to be someone who is queer, who is Black, who is disabled, whatever your identity involves, that is something that you should be able to see when you look up at where you want to be. Because if not, then I would think I don't stand a chance. If I can't turn myself into the white men that I see running my firm, I don't stand a chance. And that means that I will then probably never develop. So the whole point of Pride is that there is a diversity and inclusion committee. It is very vague. But what I have realized, it's very vague. And I guess we get to say, they do things. We have heritage days, we have all sorts of things, but a lot of things are treated as though we just have to do this because it's that day. That's the public holiday. But Pride Month, there's no requirement for anyone to recognize Pride Month. There's no requirement for anyone to recognize people's sexuality, gender identity at all. But if I walk into an office and someone misgenders me or refers to me as a pronoun that I don't identify as, that's a problem for me because you have taken something away from me. You have denied me the identity I've chosen for myself. And people cannot do that if we don't educate them. So the purpose is I need to be educating, I want to. It feels like a need because, it feels like a need, but I understand that a lot of people don't know. And further than that, I also understand that a lot of people are not aware of their own biases. Like you said, we come from a society where we experience a whole lot of things. And I won't know until someone with three arms is standing in front of me, that makes me uncomfortable. And when it does, I may just decide I'm uncomfortable with this person being next to me, so I don't want to stand next to them. And now that person can never be promoted if I am their boss, because I don't want to interact with them. So I need people to learn. I need people to accept that there are ways that people want to be identified. I need people to understand that we're not all going to be the same person. And just because I don't walk and talk like you doesn't mean I can't do what you do. So give me the space to be exactly what I am. Don't expect me to assimilate, but watch me do what you do and get better. And I think the last thing is just, I can't even read my own handwriting. I needed, and this is something that needs to happen everywhere, because you'll find that we can have sessions like this, and we can have pride flags, and we can have one person at a company or at, you know, somewhere say something and speak out, but people don't attend. People don't think they have any reason to. Why should I attend? I'm not gay and I don't support the gay people. First of all, queerness is a very wide spectrum. Second of all, the idea of a queer person is not a faraway idea. Queer people are sitting in front of you, next to you. They are in your families. They are everywhere. They are people. And that's the point. The point is, I need you to recognize that there are people who are different from you, but they need to be respected, treated as though they are people and not an anomaly that you just don't want to have to face.
Very true. Yes, Paulette. Well, you wrote an opinion that was published in the Daily Maverick titled "Media Representation of Queerness is Key to the Integration of Queer Identities into Society."
Yes.
Is mainstream media a desirable space for queer visibility and representation and recognition? What was behind the thinking when writing, writing that article?
So I have a vendetta against the rainbowification of queer pride. I think the rainbow has completely become some symbol of, yay, we're gay and we wear bright colors, and we don't. So I have been very frustrated with, I think it came out of a very small idea. I just was watching Netflix, and every time I'm watching, now that we all watch Netflix, every time I'm watching something, I understand that they have a quota to meet regarding diversity, but there's always either a gay best friend who's very flamboyant and is just there to assist the main heteronormative character to attain their love interest, or somewhere along the line, never mentioned in the story until like the last 30 minutes, some girl will kiss a girl. And that's as much as far as they go. But that says to me, there is no intent, you have no intention of actually teaching anyone. And I say this because, excuse me, I'm going to refer to my own work. But the truth is, educating people, education is not accessible to everyone in the same ways. But one thing I do know is that most of our society has access to media, whether that be TV, social media. People believe things on Facebook, WhatsApp. People believe if someone says something on TV, they believe it because, that's just how our society has become. So media is a very important place for representation and education. Media is a space where people learn what other people do and what other people like to do and things. There are a lot of things that I didn't know until I watched TV, and I wasn't allowed to watch TV for a while, so it got surprising. But what I mean is that if the only information on queerness, whether it be on social media and during Pride Month, whether it be, oh, we have a gay contestant on this show, oh, we have a queer person on this show, if it's only one very flamboyant gay man who is being represented, what does that mean? And how does that help the people who need representation? Because not everyone wears a rainbow on their sleeve, but I would like to be identified as who I identify as. So if you as the media are not presenting the different versions of queerness that need to be accepted, you have failed.
Paulette, you speak about not being allowed to watch TV. It sounds like you were brought up from a strict home. But speaking about your home, Paulette, so far when we speak about identity, we're always speaking about identity people identify as, and we're othering homosexuality or othering difference. But for you, it was actually the opposite. You said to me just shortly before we began that you were introduced to heterosexuality because of your family background. So you've got two moms and you're raised by two moms. And so the LGBTQI community and the queer space wasn't known for you, whereas with us is the opposite. You kind of are introduced to. Please tell us about that experience.
Okay. Well, I'm going to use the term intersectionality in a different way than Noah's very academic explanation of it, because to start off, and this is it gets very complicated. My mother is a Black, lesbian, Muslim, gluten-free, vegan. so there are so many different, it's like she signed up for every type of discrimination. And so because I mean, that's my parent, right? I met her and I couldn't say, why are you like this? I met her and she just was who she was. And the same goes for the rest of my family. I forgot the other part of her. She's also non-monogamous. So there are like I said, intersectionality. It gets very exciting. So for me, none of this surprised me because it's been happening my entire life. I have always been surrounded by queer people. I didn't grow up seeing a mommy and a daddy. I didn't grow up seeing family units being a mom and dad and kids. I didn't see most of our family, and I grew up in Yeovil, different from Yeovil now, but at that time, there was a bunch of gay person or queer persons living in Yeovil. And so a lot of people don't think about the consequences of homophobia because it sounds like someone outside hates me, but people can't go home because their families no longer want them there because they are homosexual or not straight. So a community had to be formed. And for me, that was my family. Everywhere I looked were people who were varying degrees of queer. Some were drag queens, some were trans before they knew they were, some were bisexual. People were just doing whatever they want. So at no point did I think that any one person would stick to dating one gender. I thought we were all just going to. And then I went to school and I just didn't question it because I was younger and I started to go to sleepovers and make friends with girls. And I never felt the need to ask, why do you have two parents that are not that? Because in my community, you could be anything, even heterosexual. You could even be heterosexual. Imagine that. So I had no questions, right? I didn't ask. I was just like, okay, this is just who you are. I didn't ask if someone had a different type of personality, dressed differently, because I didn't assume that it was a problem until I started to be, we started to have those conversations. You get older, we start to think we need to do the right thing. We start to think we need to start respecting God. And what are you going to do? Your mom's going to go to hell. Then I'm terrified, thinking about what do I do? I'm embarrassed. So there's so many ways in which I had to grow up and come out of this bubble of queer safety that I was clearly in, and recognize that other people do not do that. And what sucks about, sorry, I say sucks because I'm 20 something, but it's what sucks about it is that at no time in that community that I grew up in did anyone say heterosexual people are not normal. But when I was outside of that community, anyone who was not heterosexual wasn't abnormal, or why are they weird or different? So that's my experience.
Speaking about respecting God, Sia.
Most people would say this is the last person.
So Sia, so we've had people who've got a legal background so far, and you're coming in with an objective or outsider insider perspective
Yes.
on the role of lawyers in society and cultivating a society where we do have representation. And when it comes to LGBTQI rights, do you think that rights are livable for queer people?
Where do we begin? I'm actually going to tell you a story, and then we're going to restate that question in light of. So when I was a kid, do you remember when South Africa started integrating your Black children into formerly Model C schools, and you meet teachers? I mean, the first one I went to was a previously all Indian school, and then at some point I went to a former all Model C school, and then you see all these teachers who are suddenly traumatized at the prospect of all of these Black township kids. They never said it out loud, but you knew, like you on some level you knew, and on some level some were explicitly racist. So there was that adjustment, and looking back, I realized something. So you go in, you're Black. It's a recovering racist environment, and then I realized that I learned to navigate it because I didn't realize I was gay at the time, but because I was gay, and the teachers knew it, I was different. Now the teachers come from societies and cultures where being gay is wrong, but because it makes me a non-threatening Black man, because you're a kid, you're Black, you're a guy, you are a man, you are a threat. But because I was gay and they could pick that up, I was suddenly non-threatening. So the intersectionality of queerness and Blackness allowed me to navigate that space in a way that was not accessible to straight Black kids, to straight Black guys, because they were like they were turning into adults, hooligans from the get-go, and they could never escape that. And I, on the other hand, could become the teacher's favorite. So and then which I think contributed to me being bullied for being gay. Like if anybody's got it coming, I became that guy. So I now grow up thinking we've got a criminal justice system that criminalizes Black men up front. And on the other hand, a lot of Black people, a lot of queer people were able to come out. I think we were speaking about this earlier, where class mobility, achievement, buys you the social capital you need to come out as queer. Because if you're just going to be average Joe, excuse, like you have to pick a struggle. You have to pick a struggle. But in a sense that we now play Jenga almost with oppressions and privileges. So you figure out where you lie in terms of intersectionality, and then you're like, okay, I'm going to come out because at least I'm not poor, but I am Black. And that's just we've been playing that game, knowingly or not, from the time we were kids. And I wonder if lawyers bring that background, that level of insight, because you were saying that, you were saying that the law is not this neutral, it didn't fall down from heaven, from God. It's a human construct. We read words into it. When somebody says person, we have an understanding of what personhood is. And at one point, it just did not extend to people of the female sex. So I wonder if when you look at a case of justice, you bring that personal experience. I don't know if you observed or if you were aware of those dynamics happening in your schools, in your societies, because once you've got that information, then I think the legal space can be one where those social wounds are healed. Yeah.
If it's actually addressed.
If it's actually addressed, if you become conscious of it. Yeah.
But I'd just like to say about this, and this is something very surprising to me because I didn't think that I would ever be brave enough to do anything related to Pride at my firm. But one of the oldest, probably most famous directors in that firm is the biggest champion for Pride. It's everyone's documents. If they refer to a he or a she in a document, you don't know who the big red line says you don't know what this person's pronouns are. It's they. So there are people who are willing to learn, willing to respect people's identities. It just has to be a willingness and a learning and unlearning.
And so to answer your first question, yes, I mean, where I come from, I get to say that, yes, I'm queer, but I'm a lawyer. So, so that's where intersectionality, and when you speak about safe spaces where you now want to be this overachieving, you want to kind of, because you don't have anything else to fall back on. And so you kind of hide behind that, that you're queer, as if it's some kind of disqualifying factor, but I'm a lawyer as well, so proud and professional. Yes, and you were still going on. The second question I wanted to ask, or just, a point of discussion really is, do you think there are ways to address change and transformation from a policy level?
What
are your ideas there? I know there's quite a few. I'm leaving it to you to tell us about.
If there's one thing I love about South Africa, if there was a competition for who could write the most policy and the most beautiful, guys, we are the world champions. Like, we've got it coming out of our ears. We've got incredible legislation, but the follow through, there's something that's just not adding up. And I think what's happened, this is my belief. So I'm sort of a social political commentator. And in South Africa, you think, and I also write fiction. So the next book I'm working on is a sci-fi novel, and it's part satire. And then I realized these days that's a very bad career move to write satire, because reality is just eating you like you can't compete with reality. And the reason I mention that is, I think when we speak, if you listen to the news, you don't hear from transformation specialists. You don't hear from people who are actually implementing the policy and the legislation. You hear from social political commentators who tell you what's going wrong in society. And the reason that gap matters to me is, in South Africa, when we did this transition, we said, here's a constitution and here are the pieces of legislation we're going to put in place to heal the legacy of the past. Those pieces of policy made some people incredibly wealthy. I always pick on the straight black men. If you think BEE, you know the faces that just jumped into your mind. Like, let's not even, you know what you saw in your head. Like, you know. Some people became incredibly wealthy, so they focused, and it's that gap you're talking about, especially where black women fell through, people who are not politically connected fell through, whole communities fell through. Why? Because whoever was reading and implementing the legislation was not saying, we're using this to address the things that are coming up in the news headlines. But everything that's coming up in our news headlines is a transformation problem. Name me one thing in our news headlines that is not a transformation problem. And when you pick up the Zondo Commission report, it's BEE, procurement, BEE, it's on every page. I think Judge Raymond Zondo actually made a comment that this one policy instrument, this one piece of legislation is confusing people as state-owned enterprises. It is, because they think it's there to enrich one or two people, their friends, people who are then funding. I'm not going to name political parties. I am. People, they think it's there to enrich their political parties, and then they'll throw language over it like radical economic transformation. They do. And I asked myself, every other profession, if you said, for an example, that a brand of toothpaste cures a specific disease, you'd get the medical association coming through saying that's not true. You'd get dentists and people who make toothpaste, Unilever, they're like, no, that we never said that. But when you hear transformation being bandied about as the reason looting happens, you don't hear transformation specialists coming forward. It's the silence is deafening. And I say this as somebody who works with transformation specialists. And I always say, guys, I don't know what you're selling your souls for or how much you're selling your souls for in those boardrooms, because they are. But sooner or later, the price we're going to pay as society in terms of looting, in terms of strikes, taxi strikes. Can I go on a quick side? Yeah. The other night, was it 2 nights ago, I was going to another event. I took an Uber. That Uber started getting chased. Yeah, so I hear people beating on and then, so now we're flying through Joburg CBD, and then we see 2 cars chasing us. So now it was an Avanza, and I don't remember what the other one was. At first, I was like, Uber driver, we need to go to the police station. Like, why are they following us? Why are we being chased? I'm like, why are you asking me? He thought I was like some connected mafioso. He's asking me why we're being chased. And as we're flying around the CBD and trying to find a police station, he realizes, oh yeah, there's an Uber strike.
Oh.
When
So we can only get away with abusing our policy instruments so many times before you're caught in a flood and just there's no infrastructure or preparedness. Before you are caught, we can only, it's Russian roulette. And I think as lawyers, as custodians of the law, because nobody from the BE space is doing it, I would hope that when you hear the word transformation being used to justify something that is not transformation, it's actually the deformation of our socioeconomic fabric, that you'll speak up. So I don't even remember the question. Yes, I do. I do. But it's about the policies in place, but the integrity of its interpretation. There aren't enough public champions for that, and I would hope more voices from in here would come forward to say, this is what that means.
And what do you think it means, Sia, for, you mentioned Black women or queer people when it comes to BEE policies?
So a few State of the Nation addresses ago, my calendar works in sonas because you just are like, I count the broken political promises. Like a few sonas ago, President Ramaphosa spoke about using procurement to alleviate the problem of gender-based violence. And I thought that was a stunning idea. This idea that if you have some of your own economic power, you can then mitigate against social ills. So it was an intuition based in intersectionality. Throw money at the problem. It sounds wrong, but the thing works. It really does. But the problem with that is some gatekeeper somewhere is going to define women as somebody who can give me sexual favors. It's going to happen. It happens. You get water tankers. You want water as a woman. Yeah, but what am I getting from you? It happens. Water. At water tankers, your tap goes up. Somebody's now having to do something to get water for a family. Somebody's going to define woman according to their cultural notions of woman. So if you don't fit into that, she's married, she's got children, etc., he's not thinking about you for promotion or procurement. Some gatekeeper is reading into procurement and empowerment legislation, whatever their cultural biases say. So the question was about?
No, you're on track. It was interpreting these policies and whether or not, like you said, but you have exposed it as being neutral, and it's always up to the interpreter to read into it what women means. So does women include trans women? Does it include mass presenting women?
Yes.
Feminine presenting women? And that was basically the question. You've answered it.
And that just, if I may just add one more thing, I think as members of the LGBTI community, we have to be very aggressive. When somebody says one thing about a piece of legislation, we have to say, where are we in it? Like I've learned, if you wait until, some people are like, if you wait until you're recognized, you'll be waiting for a very long time. You have to push yourself forward and say, but what about us? And if this is not intersectionally inclusive, then unless we define, and I'm sorry, I promise I'll shut up.
No, that's fine.
If we don't learn to define, maybe let's say the word woman in terms that are not about your sexual utility or your reproductive utility in society, then if we can't recognize that, what do you call this, corrective rape, for an example of less, that is the most extreme example of compulsory heterosexuality in the world. When you're saying to somebody, because you are not straight, I will punish you. If we don't learn to use policy instruments to address that, then patriarchy wins. It just does. So we have to be very intentional and vocal, I think. Thank you. Sorry.
I think now I'm going to have to use a talking stick. So just like, Paulette, you have something to...
I did, just about transformation and how it works for, queer identities. Well, first of all, transformation, I say this a lot, and I really hope it lands where it should, but transformation it's not about who you hire, it's what you do with them. And The same way that biases work when you see a young Black woman and you think just exactly what you said. I mean, I've walked into a meeting that I was going to run and a client asked me, "Oh, are you someone's girlfriend?" No. you know, just based on what I look like, because I look young, I might be, you know, that is something you need to see people as what they are and what they can be, and you must transform them if you're going to commit to transformation. What that also means is that you must then do things that make them feel like they belong, because that's how you make transformation happen. The bathroom issue. We don't have gender neutral bathrooms. If I'm uncomfortable in either one of the bathrooms, where do I go? Are there enough disabled bathrooms? Are there ways that you are making people feel welcome so that they don't have to be uncomfortable in a space where they're meant to be growing? That's the point. And lastly, yes, we will be here saying, you know, support the gays, etc. And it's always going to be the gays sitting before you.
The quiet.
Yeah. What is it? The alphabet community sitting in front of you saying that. But whenever the honest truth, obviously South Africa, the stats are not as high, but in Africa in general, there is a genocide happening. People are being killed for not even just being homosexual or queer. People are being killed for assisting to be homo. If you go there to educate people about HIV, you can be arrested because only gay men have HIV. It's a genocide. And when things like that happen in the world, we know that it's wrong. Doesn't matter if I am not part of that community. I have a responsibility, knowing what's right and wrong, to speak up. And until the people who are not going to be ignored because they are the same old activists speak up, even for problems that are not their problems, going back to that first quote, transformation won't happen. People who are not, you know, the ones suffering need to say what you guys are doing is wrong. People who are in a meeting and see someone being misgendered or their pronouns being disrespected, call them out, educate them. It's yours, you know now. So now that you know, you have a duty to carry out your knowledge and use it for the better. That's how it happens. It's all of us. It's the law will be the law, but what we do with it matters.
Yeah, it's very important to be reminded how fragile our interactions, our relationships are, because if they can come for queer people, who else can they come for? And so we must always keep us alert that I'm also vulnerable and I'm not actually safe, but or, you know, the ideas of being privileged. So yes, thank you for that. I know now you've had a lot of thinking. And you want to say something, please do share.
Very, very briefly, I wanted to say two things around what we mean by transformation. I think on the one hand, oftentimes the word representation gets used to implement tokenism. You know what I mean?
Yes,
So I think about like how, sorry.
Could you explain what tokenism?
I'm a bunch. I think about the show South Park, and I know it's a problematic show. But for some reason, when I was, I don't know, like 10 or so, my mom bought the DVD, the movie actually, the double-sided movie, extended version of South Park, because she saw cartoons on the covers, like, oh, you'd love that. Anyway. So that's where I got all my swear words from. But there was this one character, and one of the few characters of color. His name was Tolkien.
Yeah, but that was intentional.
Exactly.
It's intentional.
And it's strange, right? Because what South Park is doing there, I actually think is really fascinating, because they're commenting on themselves. They're saying, we're not going to do that thing because we don't know how to do it meaningfully. We have no interest in doing it. We're not gonna. But we're going to comment on the fact that we're not doing it by saying, here's the token. Are you happy? You know? And by token is just a figurehead, you know what I mean? So think of, like in BEE terms, I think they're called the non-executive directors.
Wow, shots are fired.
So you have, but you have no say. You're there to fill quotas. You have no agency. Your voice doesn't actually matter, but you're here to kind of sit and look pretty and make us all look pretty. That's the first thing about representation can't be tokenism. And like you're saying, it's more than just the bodies in the room. It's about how much agency do they have, how much power do they have, how much influence do they have, are they actually able to bring themselves to the party? And the second thing I wanted to say, very similar to what you're saying, the thing that we're trying to, well, the constitutional project is a deeply profound, for me, project, because it's trying to create a society that's never existed, not on this planet. An actually egalitarian society, an equal, equitable society, that's nothing that we've really heard of. And so it's very profound. Historically, you know, what we did was you just find your tribe and you get on, and you don't have to like anybody, and you go fight for power and otherwise. But what I wanted to acknowledge is that power plays a big role in transformation, that in as much as we've been trying in different kinds of ways, and by we I mean different kinds of peoples around the world who have experienced oppression, by making moral appeals, like this is the good thing to do. As a moral person, you should be doing this. But when you look at case studies where things are effective and transformation is happening, it's someone that has power who is driving that change. And so in as much as, yes, we're making a case, a kind of moralistic case, in some ways, an ethical case, in some ways, at the bottom line, it has to align with power. And if power, whatever power means, is going to, only when power champions something do we see results. And so that's what I want to say.
Well, I mean, those were our points of discussion. I mean, I don't know if our panelists want to say anything else. Otherwise, we'll just open up the discussion for the audience. I mean, inputs, questions, comments, reflections.
Not all at once.
Roto.